So you in Indonesia doing what?
I was there doing like we were helping provide supplies for schools. We were also doing beach cleanups like before it was trendy. And it was mainly things like that. There were other things that we were allowed, like we could do while we were there, but the person who was running the trip, just for safety reasons, because we were college kids volunteering, didn't. So like things like
Did
working in
someone
bat,
come to
like
campus and say, "Hey, you want to go clean up a beach in Indonesia?"
yeah. So her name was Sandra, and she's actually like she's amazing. She doesn't do these trips anymore, sadly. But she was a big world traveler. It was just something she loved doing, and the way she did it, like for like financially, like be able to afford it, was she would work with a lot of like volunteer organizations, because if you just pay a little bit of money, then you get board, you get food, like you get like transportation. You just have to in exchange stay with them and do some volunteer work. And so that's what she was doing. And from that, she got to travel all around the world. And her biggest thing that she took away from that was that when you're in college, that's a really big time in your life when you're kind of growing into who you are, like outside your parent, like first time living without your parents and kind of choosing your own path. And she saw it as very important for kids at that age to see the world outside their backyards. And so she put up pictures at like posters at two of the campuses on, because I went to school at the University of Hawaii, the West Oahu campus. And she set up posters both at those locations to kind of just encourage kids during spring break or during their winter break to go on these trips with her. And so she would take them to, I went on two with her. One was Indonesia, and then the other one was Cambodia. We also did pit stops in Thailand and Japan. And yeah, and so we would volunteer, we would like sign up with her. She would cover all the costs. Like we'd pay, but we'd cover all the costs, and then she would fly us out there, and she would do days where we could go and explore, and we'd go see like ruins, or we'd go see historical places, go see shops, like go meet people that she's made friends with over the years. But we would be staying most of the time in volunteer houses where we would be giving back to like where we were staying. And so that was her way of getting kids to just be able to afford to be able to step outside their backyards and be able to travel a bit.
And that led you down the path of wildlife conservation?
Yeah, so I was a very different kid growing up. So even though my mom loved wildlife and like, instilled that in me at a young age, I was very much a city girl. I was used to the idea of one day owning like Louis Vuitton and like wanting to work in Hollywood and just wanting like designer things and just very, very into all of that. And I'll never forget, it was like our first night out at this volunteer house in Indonesia. It was on this island where there was basically like barely any civilization. And so all you heard was nature all around you. And something in me just switched. And overnight, I went from being like needing to wash my hair every day and wear makeup while I was like, sweating my butt off, like doing work, to not caring, like to just kind of being like, I can wear the same clothes twice. Like, I don't really care. Like getting my hair, like it can be dirty for a week. I don't care. Like I just fell in love with nature, just like wanting to be out there and kind of being like a little wild child. And that from there that was just like a seed being planted. And then over the years, it just kind of grew. And it went from me being more about like sustainability and wanting to work more with like doing solar or doing wind power or things like, or working in zero waste, like for zero waste shops, to moving to wildlife. And that shift really happened when I went on a trip with Paul Rosley for his Tamandua expeditions. And
I've had Paul Russoli on the podcast.
You've had him on the podcast.
Yep.
When was that?
A couple of, I don't know, 20 episodes ago. Just check it out. Yeah, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, he's amazing.
The podcast actually came from a social media interaction that we had about Buffalo Kloof.
Oh, really? Interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'll have to look into that. Yeah, he's been he's a great guy. I really need to like reconnect with him. He's been so busy lately. We're trying to get him on our podcast.
Yeah, he's a big guy. Good guy.
Yeah. I love him. I found out about the trip through his book, and I thought like going to the Amazon was something that only, great adventurers could do. And then found out that there's opportunities for like regular people to be able to go. And so when I was out there, I saw a lot of what conservation work really is, like the behind the scenes and how much goes into it. And that just completely shifted me from wanting to work with like eco shops to wanting to work with conservation nonprofits and be on the ground, working with the people who are doing a lot of the hard work. And then from Paul Rosley, he's actually who introduced me to VETPAW.
So let me ask this before we dive into the next sort of step in VETPAW. Actually, let's talk about VETPAW. So what do you do for VETPAW? By the way, let's introduce you. Megan Day, welcome to the Blood Origins podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be on it. Thank you for inviting me. I am the social media manager for VETPAW.
Who's VETPAW?
VETPAW is a wildlife conservation nonprofit that hires veterans to help with training anti-poaching units in South Africa and throughout the African continent. And they do a lot of community work as well. And their biggest focus, is protecting the wildlife.
And they work with Buffalo Kloof. Buffalo Kloof is one of the places that VETPAW does anti-poaching work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do. Yeah, they work with their APU team, teaching them different military skills and tactics to be able to defend their wildlife against any poaching incidents.
So, working for VETPAW, you got to very recently, right? Did you get to go to South Africa for the first time?
This is actually my third time.
First
time, so my first time was actually in 2022. In November, I went on Paul Rosley's VETPAW experience. So VETPAW has their own VETPAW experience or ecotourism, and Paul hosts his own tours where he gets groups together to go. And I was on the second trip that he was hosting.
Were you working for VETPAW at the time?
No, I wasn't. I had actually been a few months before that, I had actually stopped working for Paul Rosley just because with COVID happening, it was a bit hard for him to keep me on. But then I went out there just because I was like, I'm going to go hang out with Paul. I'm going to go see Africa because I'd wanted to go to Africa since I was a kid. And I actually had a whole dream trip planned. And what was funny is I saw him out in Africa and I was like, dude, I'm jealous, like seeing all these pictures. And I was like, something, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to go on my dream trip. And then he calls me up and he says, hey, I'm hosting these trips like to this reserve with VETPAW. Do you want to go? And I was like, of course not. Like, I was like, something, I can go on my dream trip later. Like, this is an opportunity to go with people like I enjoy hanging out with, and go see that. So I found out about VETPAW then. So I'd seen them like on social media, but I didn't pay attention to them much. But then I went on that trip with Paul, and just the entire time I was out there, I couldn't stop thinking, this is what I want to do. This is the work I want to do. And at the time they had somebody doing their social media. And so I was grilling him on like, how'd you get the job? Like what, like, do you know of any other organizations, blah, blah, blah. And he basically just gave me the information that he had. A few months later, I messaged Ryan, the founder, and I say, hey, I know you guys have somebody doing social media, but I found out for the ecotourism that there's this guy, Connor, and he was just mentioning some like holes in the program, like getting people on. I'm willing to help. And he goes, well, actually, our social media manager just left. Do you want the gig? And so that's how I got it. He didn't even look at my background. He just like immediately trusted, like said he knew of me. I'm not sure who talked about me. But then I got the job, and then I was there about little over a month later getting my first content. And then I went back for my third time just this last February.
Sweet. Okay, so now we get into the part that I like.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which is, you've painted the scene, your mother, animal lover, you fell in love with wildlife, being everywhere. I want to know from you, in that time frame, what did you think about hunting? What did you know about hunting? What was your perception? What was your opinion? What was it?
Yeah, so I mean, back then, my views on hunting were very anti. I was completely against it, hated it. saw it as disgusting. Like it just wasn't something I was open to at all.
And where do you think that came from? Those
That definitely came
opinions?
from my mom. That came
Okay.
from my mom.
Okay.
My mom is, like, as I said, she was a huge animal lover, and as I also mentioned, is she was someone who was informed but not deeply informed. And so she had her views, and those were definitely something that she just passed on to me. And you know, as a kid, like at that time, social media wasn't a huge thing, so it was harder for me to get like information easily. And yeah, I mean, at that time, I just understood hunting as being bad, as something being selfish. It was, you know, decimating populations. It was hurting predator populations. It was seen. I just knew it as hunting had nothing to do with conservation. It had everything to do with just with breed and hurting animals. That was my perception at that time, and that was something that I had that until actually only a few years ago. And I wouldn't like the way that I described it sounds very like
No, it sounds like
very harsh.
reality. It
Yeah.
sounds like reality.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. And I wouldn't say that, like, you know, I would meet a hunter and immediately like puff up and like get angry about it. Usually I was just kind of indifferent to talking to them. I was just like, you know, saying I know their views, I know my views. I'm not going to try and have this discussion that will probably go nowhere. And then I went out and saw VETPAW, and I went on Buffalo Kloof, and I found out that there was hunting on Buffalo Kloof.
What was your initial reaction to knowing you dropped into a place now? First time that you're on an experience with Paul Rosoli, and you find out that they hunt.
I had mixed feelings. It was something where, because when I found out, also immediately there was a conversation that like blew up in the car. So it was
who was in the car with you?
Connor Thompson, who works with VETPAW, and Paul Rosalie, and they both just started openly talking about hunting and about its connection to conservation. And so I didn't really get a time to fully digest that like Buffalo Kloof had hunting, because I started listening to what they had to say. Because I also understood that I've always known about conservation. Like I was more educated throughout my 20s, but there was definitely holes in what I knew. And I knew Paul has been passionate about this for over a decade, that I was willing to listen to him talk because I trusted his views based on what I knew about him and based on knowing him. And it just like I had to digest it. It took me a bit to digest, just because I did have such strong like negative views on hunting, especially any association with it being conservation work. And I also listened to Connor.
Because it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. If you don't know, it doesn't make sense. If you don't know, it doesn't make sense. I mean, when you think, as we actually talked about, if you think about protecting animals, you're not thinking about ever killing them, hunting them. So when you hear hunting like goes along with conservation, like it doesn't make sense if you don't know, like if you don't research, if you don't like talk to hunters, if you don't look into it more.
So you do this first trip and you get introduced to it. Are you like full ball into the I'm now rah pro hunting?
No, I'm definitely not rah pro hunting. It's something where the way that I like to say it is something that I understand. It's not something I like, but I understand it. You're not going to see me out in, you know, camouflage gear with a gun and like going hunting now. Like it's not it's not my thing. It's probably never going to be my thing. It's just, I mean, because I would also just like to point out I am plant-based. So
no, I was going to say, do you eat meat? Because that's typically the first question I ask, right? Somebody was like, I'm never going to hunt. And I said, okay, but do you eat meat? And they're like, oh man, love it. Love a big old ribeye. And I was like, well, it seems a little hypocritical.
Yeah, no, and I don't. Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I've been vegetarian since I was 14, and then I've been vegan since I was 26. but now I consider myself more plant-based because when I travel, sometimes I don't have the ability to
Sure.
be vegan. So I eat eggs just to kind of make sure that I don't get like bloated or sick when I'm traveling. When I have no other option. But that's the only time. When I'm at home, I'm very like the beans and the green things that, the bunny food.
So you are a vegan/vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
That, let me make sure I get it correct, because it is exactly where the society needs to be. Vegan vegetarian that will never hunt, that doesn't like hunting, but understands its role in conservation.
Yeah.
So let's play a little role play. Make you are this person,
mm-hmm.
and there's another person like you, vegan vegetarian, that still is very much anti-hunting. What have you seen? Not me, not Robbie Kroger that has the information ready to go, but you, with your own eyes. What have you seen that caused you to get to that position?
What I saw was I did a lot of deep diving on the internet, and I read both sides to kind of, because that's just who I am. I like to understand both sides. And what made me change my perception on hunting and conservation was hunting, if you look at it historically, is how conservation really started. You have Teddy Roosevelt, who was a hunter, big outdoors guy. And at that time, there was a sharp decline in a lot of wildlife. And he, very, very much a hunting community, said we need to find a way how to regulate this, because if we don't, animal species are going to die off. And at that time, hunters were the big outdoor, were the outdoor community. And so they were able to create regulations and laws to be able to limit hunting in a way that was sustainable and would be able to help wildlife. And that is something I don't think a lot of people, because I hear everyone mention Teddy Roosevelt when it comes to conservation work, but I think people skip over the fact that he was a hunter and he was a big hunter advocate. And that was something that I learned. And then I looked into what hunting does for funding conservation. And I saw that a lot of it for being able to get licenses, ammo, guns, to be able to hunt certain animals. Like you pay money for it, and the big chunk of that money goes towards conservation. And very sorry, there's a cat on my back currently. But to continue is, I learned that hunting and conservation go hand in hand. And I'm actually, I will say, taking something from what you said, is I don't believe that hunting is conservation, but I do believe it goes in hand with conservation. And I learned, I also recognized that when it comes to a lot of people who are very animals, nature, outdoors, they have this utopian idea that if we just let nature be nature, it'll go back to the way it was. And maybe in some places that's the case. But humans have had such an impact on the natural world, on habitats, on wildlife populations, that we need to step in and manage it. And a part of that is hunting. As much as I don't agree with it, it is what I understand is needed. Do I hope one day that there might be an alternative to where hunting isn't maybe the main source for conservation funding and support? Of course. But is it something I understand right now that is needed and helps with conservation? 100%.
Yeah, it's funny. I think if you asked a lot of hunters, maybe not, because here's the controversial statement. People like to hunt. They find it fun. And that's like, oh my God, you think it's fun to go hunt things? Yeah, that's why they do it, right? Let's be honest. People enjoy it. I think a couple of us would say the same thing as you. That says if there was a different funding model for conservation, whether that's a carbon model, whether that's a biodiversity model or something like that in the future that pays and keeps the places wild and you don't have to hunt, I think people would take it. But as an ecologist perspective, I always then have to come back to, but something's still going to die, right? This population in a fixed area, it's not like it's an infinite area, it's a fixed area. That population is going to get to a point where something has to happen to it. Otherwise, things start happening. Habitat starts degrading. Other animals start, being pushed to, maybe they get a disease, or maybe their population gets impacted by another population, like elephants, for example. So something's going to have to happen. Somebody has to step in and do something.
Mm-hmm.
Can you translocate the animals? Yeah, you can. There's certain animals that will be wanting, there's always going to be a home for it. You can sell those animals, you can translocate them, and maybe you don't have to hunt them. But those animals maybe are hunted somewhere else. But there's certain animals that, you can't really translocate, or there's just no market for it. Then what do? Do you just let them die? Is that appropriate? Or, again, the hunting model here is, can we extract the value out of those animals that are at their last end of their life, in which dying extracts no value? Yes, it's Mother Nature. Yes, it's natural, quasi-natural. But as a human race, shouldn't, the idea of value for wildlife is a strange one.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to put it on there, because otherwise they're not going to, something else, people like things, and because you like something, it's valued in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I seem to be rambling a little bit.
No, you're completely making sense, because the thing that I know that a lot of people will then turn around and say is that they would be like, well, then why don't we introduce more predators? And I did actually see in one of your interviews that you talked about like the balance of predators and hunting and conservation. And I think that's kind of what people need to understand, is that predators can only account for so much, but they can't be able to control the populations in the way that they grow and they populate now, especially since we can't have predator populations be so high without having human wildlife conflict, like high human wildlife conflict.
Especially in open areas, right?
Yes, especially in open areas. Yes. Mm-hmm. And that is something where I think that what people have to understand is hunting's never going to go away. I'm like, my best friend likes to say, I am an idealist realist. So like I have idealist views, but I'm very realistic on like how the world is and how things work. And I very much, I don't see a world where hunting never happens, like where hunting isn't a thing. It's just, it's always going to be there, especially for managing wildlife, and to ensure that they don't overpopulate and create an even bigger domino effect in an ecosystem. And I do believe that in certain areas that predators should be reintroduced and should have some part of that management. But I also understand that because of human population growth, that we can't have an abundance of predators, because then we'll have the human wildlife conflict. And that's a whole other issue, because then it's just going to go right back to where we started, where people are going to want to hunt and kill off the predators, which then just gets us back to square one.
Yeah, and it's a value chain, right? People value, some people value predators, some people value the prey. And then how do you balance both of those together? And you're right. At the end of the day, hunting's never going to go away. What you call it may change. So on this end of the spectrum, it's going to be wildlife management by a professional to reduce populations. That term is called culling.
Mm-hmm.
You don't sell it. You don't make any money on the taking of the animal, but maybe you take the meat and you make money off of the meat. And that seems to be societally more acceptable for some reason. You're still doing the same thing. You're still killing animals. But as soon as you add into the equation an individual from overseas coming and paying to shoot the animal, so now then there's a problem with it. Versus but the same thing happens. They'll still sell the meat. You still get money from the meat. You've got an added value of this, dare I say, trophy hunter that's come in. But that's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like in my brain, and correct me, I'd love to hear your opinion here. It seems like there's a level of monetization that is almost like acceptable, unacceptable anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, that definitely is an issue. And one thing, and I actually read this from a founder of a conservation organization recently, and I see their point, is we do all this work to stop local people from being able to hunt and be able to do bushmeat hunting. But we're okay with people from out of the country coming and spending a ton of money to kill these animals. And the difference is one comes with a lot of money, one doesn't. And that is where I understand I understand that view, because that is kind of why is it that we won't let local people hunt on these properties, but if someone has a ton of money to be able to come and pay this money and be able to hunt the exact same things that a local person was trying to hunt themselves. And that's kind of where I can understand people. Now I'm saying this based off like what I said, like I read this from a South African conservationist. And so this is kind of a new way that I've been looking at it. I wouldn't say that that's how I was before that. Before that, I honestly I just didn't, I didn't like hunting to begin with. So I didn't really have like a view of being trophy hunting versus local hunting, like locals hunting.
Yeah, but your position is exactly where we want to be. It's I don't like, but I understand. I'm not gonna do, but I get it.
Yep.
Which is where we want to be. It's it's like essentially, the other analogy that people make is I really don't like heavy metal music. But I don't mind somebody wanting to listen to it. Versus, oh no, the people, we need to cancel heavy metal music. Like that's like just because I hate it and I don't like it.
Yeah,
those people shouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah, and that's like, I mean, when the thing is that working with conservationists, meeting conservationists, I've learned that conservation work is so much more complicated than what the everyday person understands. There's so much more that goes into it. So when I joined, like when I finally started getting my toes into conservation work, I was learning things that definitely went against some of my views. And hunting was one of those. And that is where I just, as you said, I understand it. I don't like it. I am a huge supporter in trying to find another means to where it's not the main source of funding. But I also understand that it's never going away. I just, I hope that one day we can come up with something where hunting isn't the main source. Because also, I actually I was reading this while I was researching for our talk, there was an article from the North Carolina University that was talking about how hunting is actually declining in the United States specifically. And wildlife management is starting to panic a bit because they're worried about funding.
Sure.
And they're trying to think of other ways to support that. And that's kind of where I like to be able to support conservation, because there's not as many hunters out there anymore. And so that's actually where I'm like, I understand hunting, but I also think that we shouldn't be so reliant on it that could happen where there's not enough hunters and we're not getting the funding. So then what happens? So we need to have something that's an alternative.
Yeah, they've tried it. They've tried it in America. They've tried to do, Pittman Robertson, they've tried to do the equivalent on the outdoor users. They called it a backpack tax.
I was reading about that. Yep.
And it has zero legs. Nobody wants to do it on that side. And look, granted, I'll be honest. If you brought a 11% excise tax into shooting and rifles and archery equipment today, I don't
Nope.
think you'd pass it either.
Mm-mm. No, and actually,
Just
I
given
have
the arena that we live in today, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like I pay uh I pay an extra fee just so I can have a state park pass on the back of my car, so I don't have to pay it every time I go in.
Sure.
But that wasn't a lot of money. It's affordable. And I buy gear, but I mean, I live in Colorado. Like, I live in the place where the mountains is literally the reason everyone comes out here. Like, being outdoors is why people come here. And I know very many people who will do anything they can to avoid having to pay a camping fee, having to pay a gear fee, having to basically go out into the backcountry where you don't even need a permit to be able to camp or to be able to go do
100%.
outdoor things. Yeah. So how are you going to get those people to do that? Like, be able to pay extra money now.
Colorado has an amazing program called the Habitat Stamp Program.
Mm-hmm.
That Habitat Stamp Program, again, I'm going to mess up the numbers in terms of how long a time frame it took for them to raise that money, but it's raised like $178 million. And it's a $5 habitat stamp that every hunter needs to take. And I think everybody that enters into like a WMA or whatnot has to buy a habitat stamp or something. Anyway, Meg, we like you, obviously. I like the fact that you have educated yourself and you've been there, asked questions, and again, you understand it. You don't like it. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Where in Colorado do you live?
I live 20 minutes outside Denver in Lakewood. So
Okay.
like 15 minutes from the foothills, 20 minutes from Denver.
Well, put it on your calendar, please. I would love for you to be my guest. August the 29th. We have rented out the Paramount Theater in downtown Denver.
I know where that is.
And we are showcasing Lionheart, which is our documentary about mountain lion hunting.
Oh, that'll be interesting to see.
It was a documentary built for you specifically. It was not built for hunters. It was built to showcase, okay, this practice is probably the most vilified practice in North America, chasing predators with dogs. I can see why. But let me introduce you to some people through film and let them speak from their hearts about what it actually means to them.
That'll be interesting. I'd love to be there.
I'd love for you to be our guest. If you've got a significant other, please bring him. I think we're going to do a black tie event, so it's going to be really fancy to do.
Oh,
and nice. We'd love to have you.
I'd love to come. Thank you for inviting me. And actually, I do. Funny enough, I have a significant other who his best friend is a hunter.
Outstanding. Bring him too.
Yeah, I will.
Well, Meg, thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate you. You know where to find us. If you ever have any questions, if you ever want to do this again, if you want to hey, Robbie, I've got a crazy question and I want to talk about it on your podcast. This podcast is open to you for that. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'd love to be able to talk more. And I just kind of want to say, I work with VETPAW, and you guys should definitely check it out.
Yeah, where can they find more information about VETPAW?
Yeah, so you can find more information about VETPAW at vetpaw.org. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Threads by VETPAW. And we're an amazing organization working to not only give a second option for veterans to be able to show their skills and to be able to give back to communities, but also to protect endangered African wildlife.
Very cool. Very cool organization. Very cool people that work for it. So thanks, Meg.
Of course. Thank you.